To honor his sister's will, he married the black woman he'd never met. She became everything to him the dust from Zeke Harrington's horse hadn't settled when he stepped into the cramped law office. He expected paperwork, maybe some money. His sister Maggie had always been practical about these things. Lawyer Pemberton cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. The will reading took an unexpected turn within the first minute. Zeke had to marry a woman named Amara Whitfield within 30 days, a black woman from back east, someone he'd never met. If he refused, the family ranch would go straight to the bank. The lawyer's words echoed in the small room. Maggie had met this woman during her final months in a Denver sanitarium. She'd been deeply moved by Amara's character. Zeke stared at the legal documents. His sister had always been the smart one, the one with plans. But this felt impossible. Word spread through Dustwood Township faster than wildfire. By evening, half the town knew about the strange inheritance. The other half would know by morning. Eli Carter cornered Zeke outside the saloon. The mercantile owner had been eyeing the Harrington ranch for months. His smile never reached his eyes. Carter made his feelings clear about bringing certain types of people to their town. He wondered aloud if such arrangements were even legal. Other men nodded along. Sheriff Amos Crowley pulled Zeke aside later that night. The lawman's weathered face showed genuine concern. He warned about potential trouble, the kind that came when people got uncomfortable with change. Zeke walked home to an empty ranch house. The place felt different without Maggie's presence. Her personal effects still filled the rooms. Her books lined the shelves. Her letters sat bundled on the kitchen table. He'd been drifting since the war ended. No real purpose, no direction. Maggie had been his anchor. Now she was gone, leaving behind this impossible request. The 30-day deadline loomed like a storm cloud. Zeke could almost hear the gossip spreading through town, the whispers behind closed doors, the judgment in every sideways glance. Some folks had already started talking about maintaining standards, about preserving the character of their community. Eli Carter seemed to be leading those conversations. The ranch represented everything. 4 generations of Harrington sweat and sacrifice. Their father had built it from nothing. Maggie had kept it running while Zeke found himself after the war. Now it all depended on honoring a dying woman's final wish. A wish that challenged everything their small town believed about how things should be. Zeke stared out at the land that might slip away, the cattle that might be sold, the legacy that might crumble. Strange troubles had been plaguing local ranchers lately. Cut fences, missing supplies. No one could explain the pattern. In 15 days, a woman named Amara Whitfield would arrive on the afternoon stage. Everything would change. The afternoon stage kicked up a cloud of dust as it rolled into Dustwood Township. Zeke stood outside the depot, his hat turning between nervous fingers. Half the town had found reasons to be nearby. Amara Whitfield stepped down with quiet dignity. Her traveling dress was well-tailored and clean despite the long journey. She carried herself like someone accustomed to hostile stares. The whispers started immediately. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Men exchanged meaningful glances. Children pressed closer to their mothers. Zeke approached slowly. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25. Her eyes held intelligence and caution in equal measure. She extended a gloved hand. Her voice was cultured, educated. She thanked him for meeting her. The crowd's murmur grew louder. They walked to his wagon in silence. The weight of watching eyes followed every step. Amara kept her chin level and her pace steady. At the ranch, they sat in Maggie's parlor. Amara produced a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. Maggie's handwriting covered page after page. She explained how his sister had described him, a good man who needed to find his purpose, someone worth the risk she was taking. Amara had agreed to the arrangement for reasons beyond mere survival. She'd been denied opportunities back east despite her education, despite her qualifications. Maggie had promised something different: partnership, respect. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance. Only Sheriff Crowley and his wife attended. Most pews sat empty. Eli Carter made sure everyone knew about his absence. He spent the morning at his store, loudly discussing the decline of community standards. Life at the ranch proved awkward. Zeke slept in the barn. Amara took Maggie's room. They moved around each other like careful strangers. The town's treatment of Amara was subtle but persistent. Conversation stopped when she entered the general store. Prices seemed higher than Zeke remembered. Service took longer. At church, families shifted away from their pew. Women's smiles were tight and brief. Invitations to social gatherings never came. Zeke found himself caught between worlds. Defending his wife meant confronting lifelong neighbors. Staying silent felt like betrayal. The strange incidents around the ranch escalated. Someone cut 3 fence lines in a single night. 20 head of cattle wandered onto the main road. Zeke spent 2 days rounding them up. Supplies began disappearing from the barn. Tools went missing. A threatening note appeared nailed to the front door. Eli Carter made his rounds through town. He wondered aloud about the timing of these troubles. Coincidences made him nervous. Other folks started nodding along. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. Problems had started when certain elements arrived in Dustwood, elements that didn't belong. Amara faced each day with quiet strength. She tended Maggie's vegetable garden. She mended clothes and cooked meals. She read books from his sister's collection. But Zeke noticed other things. How she studied people when they weren't watching. How she asked careful questions about the town's recent troubles. How she seemed to catalog every detail. She carried a leather journal everywhere. Sometimes he caught her writing in it by lamplight. She never offered to share its contents. The monthly town meeting approached. Eli Carter had been building support for weeks. Something needed to be done about their community's problems. 3 more ranches reported similar incidents. Cut fences seemed to be spreading like disease. Everyone was losing cattle and supplies. Carter's voice carried weight in these discussions. His family had owned the mercantile for 15 years. He understood commerce. He understood cause and effect. The correlation was obvious to reasonable people. Troubles started when unwanted elements arrived. Logic suggested removing those elements would solve the problems. Sheriff Crowley found himself in an impossible position. He'd taken an oath to protect everyone in his jurisdiction, but he also had to maintain peace in a town growing more agitated each day. Zeke's isolation deepened. Old friends crossed the street to avoid conversation. Business relationships cooled. The ranch felt like an island surrounded by hostile waters. He began questioning his decision. Maybe he'd been too hasty. Maybe honoring Maggie's wishes wasn't worth destroying everything else. Amara seemed to sense his doubts. She worked harder around the ranch. She spoke less at meals. She spent more time writing in her mysterious journal. The threatening notes increased. Someone left dead chickens near the well. Rocks shattered 2 windows. The message was becoming clearer. Carter's campaign gained momentum. He spoke about protecting families, about preserving the character that made Dustwood special, about responding before problems got worse. People listened. Fear made them receptive to simple explanations. Blaming outsiders felt safer than admitting their community might have other problems. Zeke realized the 30-day deadline had been meaningless. The real test was just beginning. Marrying Amara had been the easy part. Now they had to survive what came next. The town meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. Carter had promised to address their troubles directly. He'd promised solutions. Amara continued her quiet observations. Her journal grew thicker. Her questions became more pointed. Something was building toward confrontation. The question was whether truth or fear would prove stronger. The church hall filled beyond capacity for the monthly town meeting. Eli Carter had spent weeks building anticipation. Every rancher who'd lost cattle attended. Every family worried about their safety crowded into pews. Sheriff Crowley called the meeting to order. His voice lacked its usual authority. The weight of community pressure showed in his tired eyes. Carter rose from the front row. He dressed carefully for this moment. His best suit, his father's watch chain, the appearance of respectability mattered. He began with facts. 7 ranches had reported problems in the past month, dozens of cattle lost, hundreds of dollars in damages. The pattern was undeniable. The troubles had started with specific timing. Carter produced a handwritten timeline. Dates and incidents lined up with mathematical precision. Every problem coincided with the arrival of undesirable elements. Elements that didn't understand their community's values. Elements that brought chaos wherever they settled. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. Arms crossed. The mood was shifting toward something uglier. Carter's voice grew stronger with each supportive response. He spoke about protecting their children, about preserving the peace their grandfathers had built. He suggested these incidents weren't random. Criminals often used inside information. Someone was helping them target the most vulnerable properties. The implication hung heavy in the room. Every eye turned toward the back pew where Zeke and Amara sat in isolation. Amara remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm despite the growing hostility. Carter demanded action. The sheriff needed to investigate before someone got seriously hurt, before their peaceful town descended into lawlessness. Several voices called out support. Tom Harrison had lost 50 head of cattle. The Williams family couldn't afford to replace their stolen tools. Something had to be done. Sheriff Crowley stood reluctantly. He'd hoped to avoid this confrontation, but the crowd's energy was building towards something he couldn't control. He addressed Amara directly. The community had concerns about recent events. An investigation would help clear the air. She should cooperate fully. Amara rose gracefully. Her voice carried clearly across the silent room. She welcomed any investigation. She had nothing to hide, but she requested the opportunity to present her own findings. She'd been conducting research since arriving in Dustwood. Her results might surprise everyone. Carter's confident expression faltered slightly. He hadn't expected this response. Victims didn't usually offer counter-evidence. The crowd stirred with curiosity. Some seemed disappointed by her calm reaction. Others appeared intrigued by her confidence. Sheriff Crowley agreed to hear her presentation. The law required examining all evidence, even if it came from an unexpected source. Amara returned to her seat. She opened the leather journal she'd carried everywhere. Pages of careful handwriting filled every inch. Zeke watched his wife with growing amazement. This wasn't the response of someone caught off guard. This was the preparation of someone who'd been ready. Carter tried to regain control of the narrative. He reminded everyone about the timeline, about the obvious connections, about the need for swift action. But doubt had crept into some faces. Why would a guilty person welcome investigation? Why offer additional evidence? The meeting's energy began shifting. What had felt like a foregone conclusion now seemed more complicated. Amara requested 3 days to organize her materials properly. She wanted to present a complete picture. The community deserved thorough answers. Carter objected. Delay tactics wouldn't change the facts. The evidence was already clear to reasonable people. Sheriff Crowley considered both positions. His duty required examining all available information. 3 days seemed reasonable for such serious accusations. The crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some supported immediate action. Others preferred waiting for complete information. Zeke found himself studying his wife with new eyes. Her confidence wasn't mere bravado. She genuinely believed she could prove something. The journal in her hands represented weeks of careful work. Whatever she'd been writing wasn't random observations. It was systematic investigation. Carter sensed the meeting slipping away from him. He'd counted on fear overwhelming logic. Amara's calm response was disrupting his carefully planned narrative. He made one final push. 3 days meant 3 more nights of potential attacks. How many families would suffer while they waited for convenient excuses? But the sheriff had made his decision. Thursday afternoon would hear all evidence. Then the community could decide how to proceed. People began filing out of the church hall. Conversations buzzed with speculation. The certain conclusion had become uncertain. Carter lingered near the front, speaking quietly with his strongest supporters. His expression showed frustration and calculation. Amara gathered her materials methodically. Her hands remained steady despite the hostile stares still following her movements. Zeke walked beside her toward their wagon. He wanted to ask about her research, about her confidence, about what she'd discovered. But something in her manner suggested waiting. She was preparing for battle. Interruptions might break her concentration. They rode home through the desert twilight. The ranch looked peaceful under the emerging stars. But both knew the tranquility was temporary. Thursday would bring confrontation. Truth would face accusation. Evidence would challenge assumption. Amara spent the evening organizing her journal's contents. She worked by lamplight, arranging papers into careful stacks. Zeke watched from across the room. His wife wasn't the person he'd expected to marry. She was something far more formidable. The question was whether Dustwood Township was ready for what she'd discovered. Thursday afternoon brought another packed church hall. Word had spread beyond Dustwood Township. Neighboring ranchers arrived to witness the confrontation. The stakes had grown beyond one woman's guilt or innocence. Sheriff Crowley positioned himself at the front. His badge caught the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows. The weight of maintaining order pressed heavily on his shoulders. Eli Carter sat in the front row surrounded by his supporters. His confidence had returned overnight. Whatever evidence Amara claimed to possess couldn't overcome the obvious facts. Amara entered carrying a leather satchel and her journal. She wore her best dress. Her hair was pinned neatly. She looked like someone prepared for the most important presentation of her life. Zeke followed closely behind. His stomach churned with anxiety. He still didn't understand what his wife intended to prove. Her calm certainty both impressed and terrified him. The sheriff called for order. He outlined the accusations against Amara. Then he invited her to present her counter-evidence. Amara stood gracefully. She opened her satchel and withdrew several hand-drawn maps. Her voice carried clearly across the silent room. She had analyzed every reported incident during the past month. The fence cutting followed a deliberate pattern, not random vandalism but systematic planning. She unfolded her first map. Red marks indicated damaged fence lines. When connected, they formed a clear path leading toward specific properties. Every cut fence created a cattle route toward the same destination. The damaged sections funneled livestock in one direction, away from their owners and toward someone prepared to collect them. The crowd leaned forward. This wasn't what they'd expected to hear. These were specific accusations backed by visual evidence. Amara produced her second map. This one showed the missing supplies and their likely destinations. Again, a pattern emerged. Items disappeared from ranches but reappeared elsewhere. She had visited the mercantile multiple times. Each visit, she'd observed inventory that should have been unavailable. Supplies that Eli Carter claimed were back-ordered from suppliers. Tools reported stolen from the Williams Ranch sat openly on Carter's shelves. Specialized equipment taken from the Harrison property was offered for sale at his store. Carter leaped to his feet. These were serious accusations from someone desperate to avoid justice. She was trying to shift blame onto an innocent businessman. Amara remained calm. She produced samples of handwriting from her satchel. The threatening notes left at various ranches showed consistent penmanship and paper quality. She had obtained comparison samples during her store visits. Business correspondence from Carter's desk, order forms filled out in his hand. The writing matched perfectly. The sheriff examined the documents closely. His expression grew more serious with each comparison. The similarities were undeniable to anyone willing to look. Amara continued methodically. She had tracked Carter's movements during each incident. His alibis were weak and poorly constructed. He'd been absent from his store during every major theft. She presented a timeline showing the correlation between Carter's known whereabouts and the criminal activities. The pattern was too consistent for coincidence. The crowd's mood began shifting. Murmurs of surprise replaced the earlier hostility. Some faces showed confusion. Others displayed growing anger at being manipulated. Carter's supporters looked uncertain. The evidence was more substantial than anyone had anticipated. These weren't desperate accusations, but careful documentation. Zeke stared at his wife with amazement. This level of investigation required skills he hadn't imagined she possessed. Where had she learned such thorough methods? Amara seemed to sense his wonder. She addressed the room's obvious question. Her abilities came from years of training under unusual circumstances. Her father had been Samuel Whitfield, one of Philadelphia's first colored detectives. He'd worked unofficially with the police to solve crimes in their community. Samuel had taught his daughter to observe details others missed, to track patterns that revealed hidden truths, to think logically about evidence rather than accepting obvious explanations. After his death, she'd used these skills in Boston. Wealthy women hired her privately to investigate matters too delicate for official channels. Unfaithful husbands, dishonest business partners, missing inheritances, but racial barriers had limited her opportunities. No matter how capable she proved, society refused to accept her abilities. Maggie's offer had represented a chance for genuine partnership. The room absorbed this revelation in stunned silence. They dismissed her as an outsider. Instead, they'd been observing a trained professional. Carter made one desperate attempt to regain control. He demanded proof beyond circumstantial evidence. Maps and timelines didn't constitute legal grounds for accusation. Amara nodded calmly. She produced her final piece of evidence, a signed confession from Jake Morrison, Carter's hired hand. Morrison had grown uncomfortable with the escalating crimes. When approached privately, he'd admitted his role in exchange for leniency. His statement detailed Carter's entire operation. The plan was simple but effective. Create problems for targeted ranchers. Buy their properties at reduced prices. Sell the consolidated land to the incoming railroad for enormous profit. Carter's face went white. He looked around the room desperately. His supporters were backing away. The weight of evidence was crushing his carefully constructed narrative. Sheriff Crowley stood slowly. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn. He placed Eli Carter under arrest for theft, vandalism, and conspiracy. Carter's composure finally cracked. He shouted that everyone was being fooled by an outsider, someone who didn't understand their community's true values. But his protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence spoke louder than his explanations. The community had seen how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. Amara gathered her materials quietly. She'd proven her innocence and exposed the real criminal. But more importantly, she demonstrated her true capabilities to everyone who dismissed her. The room buzzed with conversation as people processed what they'd witnessed. Everything they'd believed about the recent troubles had been wrong. Sheriff Crowley's investigation expanded rapidly after Carter's arrest. Jake Morrison's confession opened doors to darker truths. The cattle rustling was only the surface of something much larger. Morrison led them to a hidden ledger in Carter's store. The book contained names, dates, and payment records. What they discovered shook the foundations of Dustwood Township. Carter hadn't been working alone. A network of respected citizens had participated in his scheme. The conspiracy reached deeper into the community than anyone imagined. The railroad was coming through their territory within 2 years. Someone had leaked the planned route to select individuals. Those people had been quietly buying up land along the path. Lawyer Pemberton's name appeared frequently in the ledger. He'd been facilitating property transfers through shell companies. His legal expertise had hidden the true buyers' identities. The rushed will reading made sense now. Pemberton had tried to force Zeke into a quick decision. If he'd refused the marriage, the ranch would have gone to the bank, then to Carter, then to the railroad consortium. 3 other prominent businessmen were listed as investors: the banker who held most ranch mortgages, the mayor who'd approved suspicious land deals, the judge who'd expedited property transfers. Federal marshals arrived from Carson City within a week. Mail fraud and interstate conspiracy fell under their jurisdiction. The local corruption required outside intervention. Amara found herself working closely with Marshal Davidson. Her investigative skills impressed the experienced lawman. He requested her assistance in unraveling the financial connections. She spent days analyzing the ledger's coded entries. Her father's training served her well. Each notation told part of a larger story about greed and manipulation. The conspiracy had been operating for over a year. Small ranchers had been systematically targeted, their properties acquired through foreclosure or forced sale. The consolidation was nearly complete. Zeke discovered his sister had suspected something. Hidden among Maggie's personal effects were letters expressing concern about unusual business activities. She'd noticed the pattern before anyone else. One letter revealed Maggie's true strategy. She'd befriended Amara specifically because of her investigative background. The marriage arrangement wasn't about love or companionship. It was about bringing a detective to Dustwood. Maggie had recognized that only an outsider could see the conspiracy clearly. Someone with professional skills and no local loyalties. Someone who could expose what longtime residents couldn't recognize. The second revelation hit Zeke even harder. His sister had been slowly poisoned. Her supposed consumption had actually been arsenic administered over months. Carter had been eliminating threats to his operation. Dr. Morton confirmed the suspicion after examining Maggie's remaining hair samples. The levels of arsenic were consistent with deliberate poisoning. His original diagnosis had been completely wrong. Maggie's death hadn't been natural. She'd been murdered for discovering the truth about the land scheme. Carter had killed her to protect his criminal enterprise. The town reeled from each new revelation. People they'd trusted had betrayed them. Leaders they'd respected had stolen from them. Everything they'd believed about their community was wrong. More arrests followed daily. The federal marshals worked methodically through the evidence. Each conspirator's capture led to additional discoveries. Judge Harrison had accepted bribes to expedite foreclosures. Mayor Thompson had rezoned properties to benefit the railroad. Banker Stevens had manipulated loan terms to force defaults. The corruption extended beyond Dustwood. Similar schemes were operating in 3 neighboring townships. The railroad conspiracy covered hundreds of square miles and dozens of communities. Amara's reputation spread throughout the territory. Newspapers in Carson City and Sacramento reported on the woman detective who'd exposed the massive fraud. Her skills were no longer secret or dismissed. Sheriff Crowley underwent his own transformation. He'd initially doubted Amara's capabilities based on prejudice and assumptions. Now he sought her advice on complex cases. He began advocating for justice regardless of a person's background. His department started treating all citizens with equal respect. The change was gradual but genuine. The community's attitude toward Amara shifted dramatically. Women who'd avoided her now sought her friendship. Men who dismissed her now requested her professional services. But the acceptance came with complications. Some people supported her because her success reflected well on their town. Others remained uncomfortable with challenging established social hierarchies. Zeke watched his wife navigate these changing dynamics with characteristic grace. She accepted genuine friendship while maintaining distance from opportunistic attention. Their marriage was evolving beyond the arrangement Maggie had planned. Mutual respect was growing into something deeper. Partnership was becoming genuine affection. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Amara's analytical mind complemented Zeke's practical experience. They made decisions together and shared responsibilities equally. Zeke realized his sister had given him more than property protection. She'd brought him a partner who challenged him to become better, someone who saw possibilities he'd never imagined. The federal investigation would continue for months. Dozens of indictments were expected. The full scope of the conspiracy was still being uncovered, but Dustwood Township was healing. Trust was being rebuilt on stronger foundations. The community was learning to value truth over comfortable assumptions. Amara had accomplished something remarkable. She'd not only cleared her name but transformed an entire town's understanding of justice and capability. The woman who'd arrived as a suspected criminal had become their most respected citizen. The outsider had shown them truths about themselves they'd been unable to see. Her father would have been proud. His training had prepared her for this moment. His legacy lived on through her success. 6 months after the trials concluded, Dustwood Township had transformed into something unrecognizable from its former self. The railroad arrived as predicted, but now it negotiated fairly with legitimate landowners. Property values rose for everyone, not just a select few conspirators. The Harrington Ranch thrived under Zeke and Amara's partnership. They'd expanded their cattle operation and added horse breeding. More importantly, they'd found their rhythm as husband and wife. Their marriage had evolved far beyond Maggie's strategic arrangement. What began as duty had grown into genuine love. What started as convenience had become true partnership. Amara's reputation as an investigator spread throughout Nevada territory. She received requests from as far as San Francisco and Denver. People sought her skills for cases involving fraud, theft, and missing persons. Zeke discovered his own talents working alongside his wife. His practical knowledge of ranching combined perfectly with her analytical abilities. He became her partner in investigation as well as marriage. Their first major case outside Dustwood involved a missing inheritance in Virginia City. A wealthy widow suspected her stepson of stealing from the estate. Local authorities had dismissed her concerns. Amara and Zeke spent 2 weeks analyzing financial records and interviewing witnesses. They uncovered a complex embezzlement scheme involving forged documents and bribed officials. The stepson was arrested and the inheritance recovered. Their success earned them recognition throughout the mining districts. More cases followed quickly. A suspected insurance fraud in Carson City, a series of suspicious accidents at a lumber mill, a politician accused of accepting illegal payments. Each case enhanced their growing reputation. Sheriff Crowley often consulted them on difficult investigations. His department had become a model for fair treatment regardless of background. Other law enforcement agencies sought his advice on reform. The church that had hosted their sparsely attended wedding now celebrated their success. Reverend Matthews publicly acknowledged his initial prejudices and praised Amara's contributions to the community. Women's organizations invited her to speak about her investigative methods. She began teaching basic observation and analysis skills to interested students. Knowledge her father had given her was passed to a new generation. The general store where she'd once faced cold stares now welcomed her warmly. Prices were fair and service was prompt. Her business was valued rather than tolerated. Zeke often marveled at the changes in their daily life. Simple activities like shopping or attending church had become pleasant rather than stressful. The town had learned to see his wife's true worth. Dr. Morton approached them about Maggie's case. He wanted to study her poisoning to help other physicians recognize similar symptoms. Her death might prevent future murders. Amara agreed to assist with the medical research. Maggie's sacrifice deserved recognition. Her sister's memory would serve a purpose beyond their family. The couple began planning their future beyond investigation work. The ranch would always be their foundation, but they envisioned expanding their influence, perhaps opening a formal detective agency. Amara dreamed of training other women in investigative techniques. Society was changing slowly, but opportunities were increasing. Her success could open doors for others. They also discussed starting a family. The ranch needed children's laughter. Their love deserved expression through the next generation. Letters arrived regularly from grateful clients and impressed officials. Newspaper articles chronicled their cases and methods. Fame was growing beyond their territory, but they remained grounded in Dustwood's community. This town had tested them and ultimately accepted them. Their roots would always be here. Marshal Davidson visited monthly to discuss ongoing federal cases. He'd recommended Amara for a consulting position with the territorial government. Her skills were needed at higher levels. The offer was tempting but complicated. Government work would mean travel and time away from the ranch, from Zeke, from the life they'd built together. They decided to continue their private practice while occasionally assisting federal investigations. Independence suited them better than bureaucracy. Evening found them on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert sky. The peace was profound after months of chaos and revelation. Zeke reflected on his sister's final gift. Maggie had seen possibilities none of them could imagine. Her arrangement had saved more than the ranch. It had saved him from a purposeless existence. Amara had found everything she'd sought when leaving Boston: respect for her abilities, partnership in her work, love in her marriage, freedom to use her talents fully. The woman who'd arrived as a stranger had become the heart of their community. The marriage born from duty had become a love story worth telling. Tomorrow would bring new cases and fresh challenges. But tonight they sat together, partners in every sense, planning a future that honored both their dreams. Amara pulled out paper and ink. She had one more letter to write, one final message to share with the woman who'd made everything possible. She began writing to Maggie's grave. Her pen moved steadily across the page, filled with gratitude for a sister who'd seen beyond society's limitations, who'd recognized potential where others saw only problems. The letter thanked Maggie for understanding that love could grow from respect, that partnership could become passion, that sometimes the most unlikely arrangements produce the most beautiful results. Her sister-in-law had given them everything by trusting in possibilities that seemed impossible to everyone else. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.